My phone rang at 6 in the morning, the screen lighting up with an international number I didn't recognize. I let it buzz until it stopped, heart pounding, then watched as a voicemail appeared. Something in my chest tightened. I had a sense, the kind that whispers when your life is about to change again. I played the message. Miss Morvan, this is Caroline Firth with the Financial Conduct Authority. Please return our call regarding the Calmore case. It is important. I sat frozen, my tea going cold beside me. I hadn't expected them to move so fast. But then again, the documentation I'd given them had been airtight. By noon, I was seated in their central London office, a plain conference room with walls too white and a kettle that never quite boiled right. Caroline was brisk but polite, with eyes that missed nothing. We're opening a formal investigation, she said. Regina Morvan may face charges. And Miss Morvan, you may be entitled to compensation. I exhaled. I'm not doing this for the money. Caroline studied me. Then why? I thought about it. About the cottage, the silence after my father died, the slow erasure of everything we built together. I looked her square in the eye. Because she thought she could erase me. That same week, Regina vanished. I got a call from her housekeeper. She packed a bag and flew to Nice. Left no forwarding address. I wasn't surprised. I knew her type. The sort who only stay when the applause lasts. But this wasn't over. The legal machinery had begun grinding, and I intended to see it through. My lawyer, Maya Trent, was a quiet powerhouse. She wore flat shoes and never raised her voice, but when she entered a courtroom, people listened. I liked her immediately. This will be ugly, she said, flipping through the papers I gave her, but it's winnable, especially with your father's letter. We filed suit within the week. Fraud. Identity theft. Embezzlement. I'd spent nights in front of my laptop, combing through every transfer Regina made. Maya took that and built a narrative so bulletproof it could have marched into Parliament. Meanwhile, Regina's story was unraveling. A tabloid picked up the case. The headline was brutal. Heiress versus stepmother, the battle over a dead man's millions. They printed a photo of me leaving court, hair pulled back, eyes set like stone. Below it, they ran a photo of Regina in Saint-Tropez with a much younger man. The caption didn't mince words. From widow to wanted. Quote, people started talking. And not just strangers, old family friends reached out. Some apologized for keeping distance after the funeral. Some sent memories of my father. One sent a grainy video from 20 years ago, my dad teaching me to sail on the lake near the cottage. I watched it that night on loop. I was 10. He was laughing. Tiller to you, Callie, let the wind work. The case bled into every part of my life. I took leave from work. Maya warned it could drag for months. But I was ready. I had no intention of backing down. Then, Regina made her first move. A counterclaim. She accused me of slander, said I forged the documents, alleged I manipulated the media. It was absurd, but it gave her enough leverage to delay proceedings. Maya rolled her eyes when the papers arrived. It's a stall tactic, but we'll swat it down. The court battle officially began 6 weeks later. It started small. Opening arguments, procedural motions, Regina appearing via video from the south of France, with a designer scarf and practiced indignation. Her lawyer was a smug man named Vinton Brace, the kind who thought charisma outweighed facts. But Maya was better. She dismantled his arguments with precision, using Regina's own words against her. Every time Vinton tried to reframe the narrative, Maya redirected with evidence. Emails, bank statements, witness testimony from the financial advisor Regina had threatened. Regina cracked under cross-examination. Did you use Miss Morvan's identity to establish Calmer Limited? I never intended harm. That wasn't the question. She shifted in her seat. Answer the question, Mrs. Morvan. Her voice wavered. Yes. Silence rang out in the courtroom like a bell. That moment was everything. But then something happened I didn't expect. During a recess, Vinton approached Maya with a proposal. Regina would agree to a full settlement. She'd return what remained of the estate, minus legal fees and her existing holdings. In exchange, she wanted no jail time. Maya turned to me. Your call. My heart screamed no. She deserved consequences, but my mind thought of closure, of reclaiming what mattered and moving on. We want one more condition, I said. She publicly admits what she did. A statement. Signed. Vinton hesitated. No deal otherwise, Maya added. 3 days later, Regina signed it. A full confession, detailed, shameful. And then she disappeared from the public eye. I took the settlement and used it to restore the cottage. Every beam, every sill. I hired a local team and returned to Dorset that winter. When I walked into the cottage for the first time in years, I expected to cry. Instead, I smiled. Because I was home. And the final surprise came in spring. A package. No return address. Inside, a photo of Dad and me sailing, and a note. She can't erase what's real. No signature, but I didn't need one. I knew he was with me, and I knew I had finally fully won. The day after Regina's signed confession, I received a call that made my breath catch. Not from Maya, not from the press. From someone I hadn't heard from in almost 5 years. Callista, it's Aunt Rosalind. Her voice wavered like parchment held too close to flame. I saw your name in the paper, she said. I had no idea what she did to you. I closed my eyes. Aunt Rosalind was Dad's younger sister, a stern woman with silver-streaked hair who had once taught me to make lemon curd in her Devon kitchen. We hadn't spoken since Dad's second wedding. She isolated him, Rosalind continued, made him cut off the family, told him we were after his money. I should have fought harder. My throat tightened. I had spent years thinking they'd abandoned us. You tried to reach out? Of course I did. She blocked my letters, changed his number. I felt a strange kind of grief bloom, not the loss of a person, but the loss of truth. How many lies had Regina woven between us? How many years had she stolen? Come visit, Rosalind said. Stay a few days. I'd love to see the girl you've become. I went. It was spring in Devon, the hedgerows thick with blossom and bees. Rosalind's cottage sat on the edge of a valley, its stone walls wrapped in ivy, and its roof bowed like a respectful nod to time. She hugged me at the gate, tight and trembling. You look just like him, she whispered. Inside, her house smelled of old wood and bergamot. Photos lined the mantel, one of Dad and Rosalind as children laughing barefoot on a dock, another of my mum holding baby me. I kept them all, she said, even when it hurt. We spent hours talking. She told me stories I'd never heard, of my dad rescuing a stray fox as a boy, of how he met Mum at university, shy and wide-eyed in the library stacks. He always said you had her fire, Rosalind told me. You proved it. I stayed 3 nights. On the second night, I asked her a question that had been itching at my mind since the trial ended. Do you think Regina loved him? Rosalind paused over her cup. No, I think she loved what he could give her. And when that ran out? She looked for the next source. That answer didn't surprise me, but hearing it aloud still stung. I had spent so long trying to believe my father had known happiness in those final years. Maybe he had. Maybe he hadn't. But what mattered now was the truth. When I returned to Dorset, I found the cottage alive with progress. The carpenters had finished the roof. The painters were starting the trim. And tucked in the back garden, beneath a bloom of foxglove, I found something half buried. A time capsule. Wrapped in oilskin. My handwriting. I must have buried it when I was 12. Inside were bits of childhood. A friendship bracelet, a dried daffodil, a note to my future self. If you're reading this, I hope you remember who you are. I hope you're brave. I laughed through a tear. I hadn't remembered, but I had become her anyway. A month later, I opened the cottage to guests. It became a writer's retreat, a place for women rebuilding. We named it Callie's Rest. The bookings filled faster than I expected. And one day, as I stood in the kitchen serving tea, a woman lingered by the hearth. You're her, she said, from the papers. I nodded. My mother left us nothing, she said quietly. She gave it all to her new husband. But your story, it gave me the strength to fight, and I won. Her voice cracked. Thank you. I couldn't speak, I only reached for her hand. Because somehow, my story had become more than revenge. It had become a lighthouse. And the world was full of women looking for shore. This story took us a long time. If you like it, subscribe. Now back to the story. I thought the story was over after the court ruling. The money was frozen, the cottage returned, and Regina had all but vanished from the social pages she once ruled like a queen. I began to breathe again, not in gasps of relief, but in something slower, measured, real. I was healing. Then the first envelope arrived. It came by post, no return address, thick paper, expensive ink. My name handwritten on the front in script I didn't recognize. Inside was a single photograph. Regina, standing beside a man I didn't know. They were in some villa. The sea behind them, champagne flutes raised, her face radiant. A date scrawled in the corner. 2 weeks ago. I stared at it for a long time. Regina wasn't broke, she wasn't hiding. She was back. I called Maya, my solicitor. She sighed when I told her. She could have opened an account overseas, she said, moved what she could before the freeze. But she swore under oath, which doesn't stop people from lying. The next day, I received another envelope, this time, 2 photographs. One of Regina at a luxury auction house. The other, a familiar painting, my father's favorite. A seascape he'd bought in Barcelona before I was born. Sold. By her. My pulse thudded. I hadn't even known she had it. After the will reading, I never thought to ask about the art. I had assumed she donated or discarded what wasn't bolted down. But no. She kept it. She hoarded it. And now she was liquidating, piece by piece, under the radar. Maya opened a second inquiry, this time into international assets. The court had frozen all known accounts. But if Regina had stashed goods in private collections, or sold through third parties, there were gaps. We might be able to reopen the case, Maya said, if we can prove she lied. Proving it, however, meant chasing shadows across borders. I hired a private investigator. His name was Leo Bram, ex-insurance fraud division, sharp-eyed, methodical, and uninterested in drama. This kind of woman, he said on our first meeting. She's not working alone. It took weeks. But what he uncovered made my stomach twist. There was a new company, registered in Cyprus, owned by a different name, but using Regina's maiden initials. And worse, she had help. Leo traced the transactions to a secondary player, a solicitor named Grant Harrow, young, sleek, and formerly employed by Ellison and Vale, the same firm that had read my father's will. My breath caught. You're saying Ellison's people were involved? Not Ellison himself, but Harrow worked under him, quietly resigned last year, right around the time the property trust shifted hands. I couldn't believe it, but the trail was clear. Harrow had helped structure the fake company, funnel the funds, and clean the sales of property and artwork alike. It wasn't just fraud. It was betrayal embedded in the very firm I had trusted. Leo asked, "Do you want to go public?" I hesitated. My name was still circling the blogosphere. The retreat was gaining traction. The guests who stayed often asked for selfies, thanking me for sharing my story. Would another storm be worth it? Then I received the third envelope. Inside wasn't a photo. It was a letter. In Regina's handwriting. Dear Callista, if you're reading this, I imagine you're still digging. You always were tenacious. It's a strength and a curse. I suppose you think you've won something, reclaiming your precious little cottage. But darling, you don't understand the game you're playing. I learned early that power doesn't live in names or deeds, it lives in leverage. And you, my dear, have none left. Stop chasing ghosts. Go back to your quaint retreat. Serve tea to broken women. That's all you'll ever do. Warmly, Regina. I didn't sleep that night. Because in that letter was more than arrogance. It was a dare. So I called Leo. I want everything, every account, every item, every person she used. And I want names. He paused. You ready for what you might find? I wasn't before. I am now. And as I hung up, I opened my laptop because I knew how to turn a story into a weapon. I began writing a new blog post. Title: When Your Stepmother Sells Your Soul, A Daughter's Fight Against Inheritance Fraud. By noon, it had gone viral. By evening, a legal podcast picked it up. And the next morning, my inbox was flooded. Victims, lawyers, investigative journalists. They were ready. And so was I. Because Regina had underestimated one thing. I wasn't just a survivor. I was a witness. And I had a voice sharp enough to cut through her empire. The retreat was full again. By midsummer, Callie's Rest had a waiting list 6 weeks deep. I spent my mornings in the garden, pruning lavender and baking scones, and my afternoons reviewing inquiries, manuscripts, and tea blends. But each evening, as the sun folded behind the hills and the windows glowed with quiet stories, I waited. Because I knew it wasn't over. Regina's last letter hadn't been a farewell. It was a promise. And promises from people like her don't fade. They rot, quietly, slowly, until the stench reaches everything. So when the anonymous email landed in my inbox, I wasn't surprised. Subject line: No Zoe, you should check the house in Kent. No Zoe in no Zoe's doughy. No signature, no attachments. But I knew exactly what it meant. My father's old property, a place he bought before marrying Regina. A simple 2-story in the countryside that had been empty for years. I had assumed it was sold quietly or absorbed into the estate shuffle. But curiosity burned sharper than fear. I called Leo. Kent, I said. Any records on it? A pause, then papers rustling. Still listed under his name, Leo said. Never formally transferred. That's odd. Can you meet me there tomorrow? Already warming the engine. The next day we drove out together. The house stood at the edge of a long gravel path, its windows shuttered, its garden overgrown. Ivy snaked across the bricks like veins. Leo jimmied the lock with surgical precision. Inside, the air was stale. Dust bloomed with every step. The walls were yellowed with age and silence. But the house wasn't empty. Not entirely. In the upstairs study, beneath a loose floorboard, Leo found a safe. Combination? Try his birthday. Click. Inside, documents. Dozens. Some of them sealed in stamped envelopes, others in thick folders. But one caught my eye immediately. A file labeled R.E. Contingency, Regina L. Inside, my father had written a full report. Emails. Transactions. Copies of letters she'd sent to friends, subtly isolating him from family. Even a psychiatric report he had quietly commissioned, suspecting she'd tried to gaslight him into questioning his own memory. My hands trembled as I read it. He knew. He had known before the stroke. And he had planned for it, documented everything, protected me in the only way he could, by hiding the truth until I was strong enough to use it. Leo stared at the file. This is a bombshell. No, I whispered. This is a resurrection. We took everything. Back at the cottage, I read every page, cross-referenced every note. It wasn't just about money. Regina had manipulated more than bank accounts. She had stolen time, erased people. And when my father had finally resisted, she'd increased his medication dosage without his knowledge. That was in the medical notes. He'd suspected, but never had the proof. Until now. I compiled everything into a new file, gave it to Maya, and 3 days later, we filed a motion to reopen the estate trial under new evidence. The hearing date was set. And then the media caught wind. It wasn't just a daughter reclaiming what was hers. It was now a possible criminal case. Elder abuse, fraud, medical tampering. Headlines flared. I stayed quiet, focused, but I knew Regina would surface. And she did. 3 days before the hearing, she walked into the retreat. Not in disguise, not unannounced. Wearing ivory silk and a hat the size of a promise. The guests stared. Some whispered. I stepped into the foyer. You shouldn't be here. She smiled. It's open to the public, isn't it? I stepped closer. You still think you're untouchable? No, darling. I think you're tired of fighting, tired of dragging your father's name through the dirt, tired of turning your pain into performance. I didn't flinch. He gave me the tools. You handed me the motive. Her eyes narrowed. You'll lose everything. Then I lose it clean, not like you. She left. But I knew that wasn't the end. And I was right. The night before the hearing, someone broke into my cottage. They didn't steal. They searched. Tore apart drawers, opened closets, flipped mattresses, looking for the file. But it wasn't there. It was already with Maya, with backup copies, with cloud encryption, and a copy at Leo's, sealed and timed for release. They found nothing, except a photo on the fridge. Me and Dad, on the rowboat, sunburned and laughing. The intruder left it face down on the kitchen table. A message. But so was mine. Because I took that photo, reframed it, and brought it with me to court. As I walked past Regina on the courthouse steps, I held it up. He knew. And for the first time, she didn't smile. Not even a little. Because the next morning, I would take the stand. And I wasn't coming down until the truth was loud enough for every daughter to hear. The courtroom felt colder than the outside air. I don't know if it was the stone walls or the presence of so many people in tailored suits and clenched jaws, but the chill sat beneath my skin like a silent warning. Still, I walked in with my head high. The photo of my father and me stayed tucked in my coat pocket. Maya met me at the door, her eyes sharp, mouth a straight line. They filed a motion to dismiss this morning. I laughed. Of course they did. The judge denied it. That felt like a small breath, a single flame in a dark room. We took our seats. Regina sat 2 benches ahead, draped in navy, her hair coiled into a perfect bun. Her new solicitor, a sleek man in a steel gray suit, whispered something in her ear. She didn't turn. But I knew she saw me. The hearing opened with testimony from Maya. She presented the contents of the Kent House safe, the forged signatures, the hidden shell accounts, and the medical documentation suggesting over-medication. Regina's counsel objected, claimed hearsay, claimed tampering, and yet, Maya countered, not once has the defendant denied the existence of these documents, nor have they offered a single alternative explanation. Then it was my turn. The bailiff called my name. I stood, walked to the witness chair, swore my oath, and began to speak. I spoke of the cottage, the promise Dad made to me, the way Regina moved like smoke through the cracks of our life after Mom died. I told them how she smiled at my university graduation with a hand on my father's shoulder and a knife under the table. I described the trust she created in my name, the companies, the accounts, the sale of my inheritance from beneath my feet. I described how she mocked me after the confession, and then I stopped, reached into my pocket, and placed the photo on the desk. This was taken 3 weeks before my father died. We'd gone rowing, like we used to when I was little. He told me then, again, that the cottage would always be mine. It was more than property. It was memory. It was love. And it was the last thing he tried to give me. I looked at the judge. Regina didn't just steal money. She stole intention. She stole my father's legacy. And she did it knowing I couldn't fight her until I found my way back. The courtroom was silent. Then Regina stood. Your Honor, may I address the court? Her lawyer looked alarmed, whispered something sharp. She waved him off. I see now, she began, voice honeyed, that I miscalculated. Every muscle in my body locked. Callista was always clever, but I underestimated her need to win, to make herself a martyr. Gasps murmured around us. The documents may exist. Fine, the transactions happened. But he gave me permission. We discussed it. He trusted me. Then why hide it? Maya said. Because he didn't want to upset her. Regina pointed at me. She was unstable after her mother's death. He wanted peace. I felt my chest go still. The judge interrupted. Enough. Save the emotional speculation. What evidence do you have? Regina didn't answer. The judge recessed, told us to return in 2 days for the final decision. As we left the building, I exhaled into the wind. I didn't feel victory, not yet, just the quiet trembling of momentum. Then Leo called. She booked a one-way flight to Dubai, departs tonight. She's fleeing? Unless we act now, I told Maya. Within the hour, the court issued a travel restriction. They caught her at Heathrow, detained at the gate. The photo of me and my dad was in her purse. She kept it, Maya said, even while trying to destroy you. But I didn't feel pity, only the strange ache of closure. 2 days later, we returned. The courtroom wasn't cold anymore. It pulsed. The judge read the verdict aloud. Inheritance fraud proven. Estate ruling overturned. All assets to be restored. A criminal inquiry was opened. Regina stared at the table, face blank, as if she finally realized the mirrors she'd lived behind had all cracked at once. I didn't speak. I only nodded. Outside, reporters shouted questions. But I didn't stop. Because Callie's rest was waiting. And women were already calling. Because when you survive a storm like this, you don't build walls. You build bridges. And you light the path for those still in the dark. Before we jump back in, tell us where you're from. If this story moves you, please subscribe. Tomorrow, I have a special story for you. The verdict rippled across the country faster than I expected. By the time I returned to Callie's Rest, 3 women had already arrived early, each holding folded newspapers like shields. One had underlined quotes from the article and traced them over in ink. I didn't know what to say. They did. Thank you for not staying quiet, one whispered as she passed me tea. But silence has its own cunning way of returning. 2 nights after the ruling, I woke at 3 a.m. to the sound of an engine. A sleek black car idled at the end of the drive, headlights off, just humming in the dark. I peered through the curtain, heart lurching. When I stepped out onto the porch, the car reversed, tires crunching gravel as it backed into the trees. Leo was at my gate by morning. I have someone watching the lane now, he said. You think she sent someone? Could be press, could be worse. He didn't elaborate. We increased security, changed locks, installed motion-activated lights. But it wasn't just Regina that worried me anymore. Because the more visible I became, the more enemies emerged. A podcast host dissected my story for clicks, suggesting maybe I exaggerated the scale of abuse. A former client of Regina's leaked emails, accusing me of orchestrating the whole thing for sympathy and book deals. Then came the anonymous messages. First, comments under the retreat's posts. Maybe her dad changed his mind. She's just mad she wasn't the favorite. Nice women like her always have a savior complex. Then emails. Chucks, you don't deserve what you took. Chucks, he would be ashamed of you. I wanted to shut it all down, delete the site, lock the doors. But something stopped me. A knock at the front desk. A woman, late 50s, pale cardigan, eyes swollen from crying. Is this Callie's Rest? I nodded. She handed me a letter, folded, creased at the edges. My daughter read your story. She said it gave her the strength to leave. She didn't make it. Her voice broke. But she wrote this, said to give it to you if anything happened. The woman turned and walked away. I opened it in my room. Inside. Dear Callista, you made me believe it wasn't my fault, that I wasn't crazy, that silence wasn't safety. You gave me something that money and family never did. Permission. Thank you. L. I cried. For the first time in weeks. Because I realized I wasn't just fighting Regina anymore. I was fighting the echo of her, in every woman she reminded me of. In every silence she represented. In every daughter who'd been told to smile through theft, to stay quiet through betrayal, to shrink through inheritance. So I began to expand. Callie's Rest opened a second wing, then a third. We hired counselors, artists, trauma-informed chefs. We built a library. We started a podcast. And when a journalist asked me if I ever thought I'd become a public figure, I said, I thought I'd be a daughter, that was all. And then someone tried to take even that. Regina's trial proceeded. More witnesses came forward, 2 former aides from my father's estate, a nurse who had noticed unusual prescriptions, a friend of Regina's who admitted she'd warned her to stop before it went too far. The prosecution built a timeline. They called it a quote, campaign of erasure. I sat in the front row, every day. And when Regina finally took the stand again, her face was drawn. Not angry, not smug, just tired. She said little, denied most. And when the prosecutor asked if she felt remorse, she looked at me. Remorse? She echoed. A pause. Then, for underestimating her. That was all. Her solicitor tried to soften it. It didn't matter. The jury deliberated for 2 hours. Guilty. Fraud. Elder abuse. Perjury. Sentencing was postponed. But when I walked out of the courtroom that day, the sun hit my face like absolution. Leo walked beside me. You did it. He did it, I whispered. He left me a map. I just followed it. Then my phone buzzed. Another message request. I nearly ignored it. But I opened it. Hi, Callista. You don't know me, but I was Regina's stepdaughter. From her first marriage, the Neich Turkesches Stunts. My breath caught. So I think you need to know what she did to my mother. And just like that, a new door creaked open. And I wasn't stepping back. I was stepping through. Because this wasn't the end of the story. It was only the widening of its truth. Let me know when you're ready for part 7. I thought the courtroom would be the last battleground, that after the verdict, the rebuilding would be linear, gentle, that healing would follow justice like a shadow follows light. But nothing about this story was ever gentle. The day after Regina was taken into custody, I returned to Callie's Rest with Maya and Leo. We walked through the grounds in silence, surveying the blooming lavender and the creek where the women read poetry under the willows. Everything looked untouched. Safe. Until we reached the main entry. The front door had been scratched. Not vandalized, not broken. Scratched. A single word. Liar. Leo crouched to inspect the mark. This wasn't kids. Maya reached for her phone. I'm reporting it. I stood still, stomach cold. Let them come, I whispered. They're just angry we didn't stay small. But inside, I knew what this meant. Regina still had defenders. That night, the retreat felt different. I hosted our usual welcome circle by the fireplace. 8 new women, all strangers when they arrived. All watching me with a mixture of reverence and trepidation. One of them, a woman named Dahlia, said quietly, I almost didn't come. My ex's family said I was trying to be you, like it was a bad thing. I smiled. It's not. They all nodded. Later, after everyone had gone to their rooms, I sat by the fireplace with my journal. I wrote a single line. Truth is a storm. And we survived the rain just to find it. 3 days later, I received another message. From the same woman who claimed to be Regina's former stepdaughter. There's a storage unit in Bristol, she wrote, registered under my father's name. She told us it was filled with books. I went back this morning. It's not books. It's boxes, files, old passports, a binder with your father's name on it. I arranged to meet her. Her name was Elise, mid-30s, tired eyes and steady hands. She married my father when I was 10, she told me. Told him I was jealous when I said she read my diary. Gaslit us all. When I found her story, I recognized everything. She opened the back of her car. Inside were 5 boxes. We drove them straight to Maya's office. By midnight, we had unearthed times evidence of another fraudulent marriage certificate, times 5 passports with different names and slight variations of Regina's birth date, times a ledger of payments to various private clinics in Switzerland, times and a birth certificate I never expected to see. Mine. Why would she have this? I asked. Maya frowned. Look closer. And then I saw it. Filed with mine was an application for legal guardianship, filed months after Mum died. Regina had tried to become my guardian. But I was 17, I whispered, which means you only needed one surviving parent. If she could have proved your father unfit or unstable, she could have taken full control. She was planning this longer than we knew. Maya nodded. Years. Decades, even. Elise said, she doesn't destroy people quickly, she does it quietly, makes you think you deserve it. And that's when it hit me. We weren't just uncovering fraud. We were untangling a pattern. A life spent weaponizing love and law. Leo suggested compiling everything into a formal brief for federal investigators. Maya agreed. We're past the inheritance case now, she said. This is going to turn into something much bigger. And it did. 3 weeks later, Regina's case was transferred to a national fraud unit. More victims came forward. A woman in Vienna, another in Marseille, all with similar stories, all silenced by shame. But now? Now they had a name. Now they had a trail. Now they had us. I stood in the garden the night I got the call. The stars were out. The lavender glowed silver under the moonlight. Maya's voice crackled on speaker. She's being moved to a secure facility. Is she talking? Not yet, but she will. They always do. I thought I'd feel triumphant. Instead, I felt solemn. Because I realized this was bigger than me. Bigger than one cottage, one name, one inheritance. It was about what women are expected to survive, what we're told to endure, and how rarely the world believes us until it's too late. So I picked up my pen and began writing again. Not a blog, a book. Title: How to Reclaim the Fire They Tried to Drown. Let me know when you're ready for part 8. It took me weeks to understand the full impact of what we'd unearthed. Regina wasn't just a villain in my life. She was a cipher. A woman who left no fingerprints but scorched footprints behind her. And every step she took led somewhere darker. By the time federal investigators pulled up her travel history, we had a web of aliases that stretched across half of Europe. Her name appeared on obscure land deeds in Tuscany, on banking authorizations in Zurich, and even on a rental property lease in the south of France. She had built a life on fraud, one shell at a time. But the most disturbing find didn't come from the investigators. It came from Elise. She arrived at Callie's Rest, unannounced, clutching an old USB stick. I found this in one of her jewelry boxes, she said, buried beneath false bottoms and fake pearls. It had your father's name on it. We plugged it in together, in my study. The room dim and silent. What we found made my stomach twist. Video files. Home footage I'd never seen. My father, speaking into a small handheld recorder, his voice hushed. If anything happens to me, Callista, you need to know what she did. The screen flickered, showing dates and times. Clips stitched together like a man desperate to leave behind the truth while he still could. She started switching my meds, he said in one. She's lying to Ellison, he said in another. I tried to speak to Callista, but she screens my calls. Tears blurred my eyes. Elise placed a hand on my shoulder, steady, human. The footage spanned months. The last file was dated 2 days before his stroke. I made a copy of everything, put it in the house in Kent. If you're seeing this, Callie, I trust you. I shut the laptop, and we sat there in silence. Grief washed over me anew. Not the loss of my father, but the loss of how deeply alone he had been. How close I'd come to never knowing, to never seeing this. We handed the USB to Maya and the investigators. The case against Regina swelled. Charges multiplied. New warrants were issued. And through it all, I kept working, kept opening the retreat doors, kept baking, cleaning, hosting, teaching. Until one evening, a knock came I hadn't expected. An elderly woman with sharp eyes and a paper-thin voice stood at the threshold. "Are you Callista Morven?" "Yes. I was your father's first secretary. Back before he made his first million, I saw your story on the news." I led her in, heart-thudding. She sat slowly and handed me an envelope, yellowed, wax-sealed. "He asked me to hold this, said to deliver it only if things went wrong. You kept it all these years? He was the best man I ever worked for." I opened it in my room that night. Inside was a letter. "Callie, if this finds you, I hope you already know most of what happened. I tried to stop her. I tried to protect you. But I underestimated how far she would go. Don't let guilt turn you into stone. You loved fiercely. That was never your weakness. That was your weapon. And if you find this, it means you fought for the truth. I never doubted you would. Love always. Dad." I folded the letter with trembling hands. Put it in the small cedar box I kept under my bed. The one that held Mum's earrings. My university ring. And now, every artifact of the truth I once thought buried. The trial was nearing its final weeks. Regina remained mostly silent. Her legal team floundered beneath the weight of new evidence. A judge scheduled a full sentencing hearing for early fall. But I had already made my decision. When the press called for quotes, I offered none. When news anchors asked for interviews, I declined. Because I had one final thing to do before closure could find me. I drove to the cemetery. Alone. Stood at my father's grave. And read him the letter out loud. When I finished, I sat down in the grass, beside the stone. And I forgave myself. For not knowing sooner. For believing too long. For surviving the only way I knew how. I stayed until the sky bruised into dusk. Then I stood. And I walked away, lighter than I'd felt in years. I never imagined that justice could feel so unfinished. Regina was gone, yes. The verdict had cracked her empire wide open. Her sentencing was scheduled for the fall, and her name had vanished from every board, registry, and charity gala circuit she once haunted. But in her wake, a peculiar silence followed me, the kind that doesn't soothe but listens, the kind that watches. Callie's rest was booked solid. Women poured in from across the country, even from abroad. Stories slid across the kitchen table at breakfast. Tears were folded gently between pages of poetry, and in the silence after candlelit dinners. But with every brave voice I listened to, I realized something terrifying. Regina was not an anomaly. She was a symptom of a deeper rot, one that thrived behind polished inheritance laws and the polite silences of family wealth, one that used words like protection and asterisk trust while clawing away agency, autonomy, and generational dignity. And when The Guardian ran a feature on the retreat, the response overwhelmed me. Not just praise, not just stories, but warnings. Whispers of women still stuck, still voiceless, still fighting to be believed. It was around this time I received a letter in an ivory envelope. No sender. Hand-delivered. Inside, "We know what you're doing. We know what you've taken. Stop before you make enemies you can't see." It wasn't signed. But it was typed on the same stationery Regina used to write thank you notes. I recognized the watermark. I stared at the page for a long time. Then I burned it. And I booked a panel slot at the next Women's Equity and Law Summit in Manchester. Not to talk about Regina, but to talk about systemic silencing and the legal loopholes that made women vulnerable, again and again. That day, I stood in front of 500 lawyers, advocates, survivors, and I said, "This isn't about one stepmother. This is about the step-by-step erosion of female agency. We are not stories waiting to be weaponized. We are the architects of our own justice, and it's time the law stopped treating us like cautionary footnotes." I didn't expect the standing ovation, but it felt like wind under my ribs. And then, As if the universe had been waiting for that moment, I received a call from an unknown number. Callista Morvan? This is Inspector Renly. We need your help. A woman in her early 60s had been found in Essex, living under a false name, bank accounts in her ex-husband's name, property signed over without consent, children cut out of inheritance through fabricated mental health claims. Her paperwork bears similarities to Regina's, and the fake solicitor used the same last name as one of your shell companies. We think your stepmother was part of something wider. My pulse slowed. How wide are we talking? Possibly international, possibly organized. I agreed to testify. And just like that, the story deepened. What began as personal became structural. I testified before a joint commission on estate fraud and power abuse. Then at a private EU roundtable on wealth laundering via marriage and guardianship. Meanwhile, Callie's Rest partnered with a pro bono legal network. We created a referral pipeline. We launched an archive of anonymized affidavits. We held storytelling nights and advocacy workshops. And somewhere in the middle of all that, I finished the book. How to Reclaim the Fire They Tried to Drown became a bestseller within the first 3 weeks. But I didn't care about the lists. I cared about the messages. From daughters. From wives. From estranged nieces, stepchildren, grandmothers who said, "You made me feel seen. You gave me a script for saying no. You reminded me I wasn't crazy." Sometimes healing doesn't come in a courtroom. It comes in the flick of a page, or the clasp of a stranger's hand, or the way a woman finally walks into a room without apologizing for existing. But just when I thought the storm had passed for good, Maya showed up on my porch, unannounced, pale. "You need to see this," she said. She handed me a document, freshly scanned. Interpol recovered this in Geneva during a raid tied to Regina's offshore holdings. I opened it, and my breath vanished, because at the top was a name I hadn't heard in years. My mother's. And beneath it, a death certificate, filed 3 months before she actually passed, signed by someone who wasn't her doctor, and linked to a claim, a life insurance policy. One I never knew existed, one that was cashed out. To Regina. For days, I sat with the document like it was radioactive. My mother's name falsified, a death certificate forged, and a life insurance policy worth over £400,000 paid out to the woman who had dismantled our lives piece by piece. The policy had been signed 6 months before Mum's actual passing. The doctor listed as having confirmed her cause of death had his license revoked in 2011 for issuing fraudulent medical clearances. Maya, white-faced, contacted the investigators. "This changes everything," she said. "If Regina forged this, it's murder adjacent. At the very least, criminal negligence with malicious intent." I couldn't breathe. Because for all the theft, the manipulation, the deceit, I had never let myself believe that Regina might have had her hands in my mother's death. Until now. And once you allow that possibility in, the entire past reshapes. Maya launched a formal motion to unseal Mum's medical records. Meanwhile, investigators secured warrants in 3 countries to locate the path of that insurance payout. Regina's web wasn't just expanding, it was cracking. And in those cracks, light started pouring in. The press, once cautious, was now relentless. Newspapers ran headlines like, "Inheritance scandal widens. Could there be a second death?" Callista Morvan's crusade turns criminal investigation. I was being called everything from a modern heroine to an opportunist. I stopped reading the headlines. Instead, I focused on the work. Because while the past unraveled, the present pulsed with purpose. Callie's Rest was now home to its 5th cohort. We launched a mentorship program for young women estranged from family wealth, giving them legal navigation tools and economic literacy workshops. We hired a grief counselor. And for the first time in a long time, I slept through the night. Then the report came in. Maya called, voice tight. They traced the funds. Regina deposited them into an offshore account, exactly 3 weeks after your mother died. And the policy? Filed by a firm she worked with in Monaco, under a false name, but the address listed? One of the properties Regina once claimed under your father's trust. So it's her. Every path leads back. We submitted the evidence. And then, something I never expected. The Crown Prosecution Service launched a formal inquiry into the death of Margaret Morvan, my mother. They exhumed the body. Quietly. With a court order. Forensic experts were called. The results would take time. But something in me shifted. The ache of grief evolved into something stranger. Not rage. Not even sorrow. But readiness. Because even if we never got a definitive answer, the truth was no longer silent. And that alone was revolution. I visited Mum's grave after the exhumation. There was a note tucked under the headstone. Weather-worn. I unfolded it. It read, asterisk. I remember her laugh. She always brought scones to the school fair. I never forgot that. I hope you get justice. No name, no date. Just another echo of the life Regina tried to erase. The sentencing hearing for Regina was only 2 weeks away now. Maya and Leo were in constant contact with the prosecution, and I had started preparing a statement. The final one. To read aloud. Not to sway the judge. Not for the reporters. But for Dad. For Mum. For every daughter who once thought silence was safer than speaking. And maybe, just maybe, for the little girl I used to be. The one who buried her voice along with her childhood and only now realized she was allowed to sing. The day of Regina's sentencing began like any other, which almost made it worse. The sky was a dull watercolor of gray. No drama, no thunder. Just quiet clouds hovering over London like they were trying to listen in. I woke early, dressed in navy, the same shade Regina had worn at the fraud hearing, but mine was soft wool, not armor. I didn't wear makeup, didn't twist my hair up. I walked in as myself. Leo met me at the steps. You ready? More than I thought I'd ever be. The courthouse was different this time. There were new faces in the gallery, journalists from abroad, victims from other branches of Regina's trail. Elise was there too. She hugged me tight, eyes red-rimmed but steady. Regina was brought in from holding. She looked smaller. Her frame had shrunk somehow, the sharp cheekbones now just angles without power. Her eyes didn't meet mine. The judge entered. The room rose, sat, held its collective breath. He read out the charges one by one, his voice like gravel dragged across polished wood. Times fraud. Times conspiracy. Times financial exploitation. Times medical interference. Times probable cause for inquiry into suspicious death. And then came the sentence. 24 years. No parole for the first 15. A murmur moved like wind through the room. I closed my eyes. When they opened, I was asked to stand. Ms. Morvan, would you like to make a final statement? I stepped forward. Took out the paper I'd rewritten 12 times. And read, Your Honor, I don't speak today to celebrate punishment. I speak because truth, once spoken, becomes armor. And for too long, women like me were expected to suffer in polite silence. Regina Lynn Morvan did not just steal money. She stole inheritance, trust, and the quiet dignity of closure. She preyed on the vulnerabilities created by grief. She turned love into leverage. But we did not break. We built. And while she tried to turn memory into a weapon, we turned it into light. My mother died, never knowing what really happened. My father tried to warn me, and for that he paid with his voice, his autonomy, his legacy. But through this trial we returned his name to honor. So I speak now, not just for myself, but for every woman watching, for every child doubted, for every story dismissed because it made someone uncomfortable. Regina taught me how to survive, but justice taught me how to live. Silence followed. The kind that swells in the lungs, the kind that cleans. The judge nodded. Court adjourned. Outside, I was swarmed by microphones. Do you feel vindicated? Quote, will you testify in the insurance investigation? What will you do next? I smiled. I'm going home. There are women waiting. And scones to bake. That night, Callie's Rest held a fire circle. Dahlia read her poem aloud. Elise played guitar. And a new arrival named Tasha, only 23, said, I didn't think I had a future until I found this place. I looked around at the faces glowing in firelight. And I knew this was what justice looked like in the after. It looked like healing, like rebuilding, like resting. But there was still more to do. 2 days later, I flew to Zurich. Interpol agents met me in a plain building outside the city. They had recovered another ledger, this one older, handwritten, dates going back to the late 90s. We believe Regina was part of an elite network, one agent said, targeting wealthy widowers and families in grief. They had names, connections, and an empty space at the bottom of the hierarchy, the one Regina reported to. We think she was recruited, trained. My blood went cold. Because if Regina wasn't the top of the pyramid, someone else was. Someone still out there. Zurich wasn't quiet like the books promised. It was brisk and precise, the kind of place where even silence felt scheduled. And yet I found myself staring at a worn binder in a basement archive, surrounded by 2 Interpol agents and a wall of fluorescent lights buzzing with tension. Regina's ledger. 36 names, 36 families, all targeted over 2 decades. Some of them had already come forward. Some were unaware anything had ever been taken. But what struck me wasn't the number. It was the final entry. Project ASH. No context. No names. Just that single term, underlined twice in red. Inspector Renly looked at me. We believe it refers to a person, possibly a recruit. A successor? Possibly, or a partner. We spent the next 8 hours combing through the rest. Photos, travelogues, coded emails. Regina had been more than an opportunist. She'd been a cog in a very large, very old machine. By the time I boarded my flight back to the UK, I felt raw. Like my story was just the prologue to something worse. Callie's Rest was aglow when I returned. Soft lamplight from the windows, laughter spilling from the dining room, the scent of thyme and roasted parsnips warming the air. It felt like sanctuary. But I didn't tell them what I'd found. Not yet. Instead, I joined the circle. I listened to a new guest read aloud her letter to her younger self. I passed the tea. I watched as healing happened in real time, thread by invisible thread. And later, in my study, I opened my journal. The fire is still burning, but now I know how to walk through it. The next morning, Maya called. They want to launch a formal investigation into the ASH lead. They want your permission to share the contents of your father's files. Share them with whom? Interpol, MI6, possibly the Home Office. My chest tightened. Do it. Later that day, Elise arrived with 2 more documents. I wasn't sure I should bring this, she said, eyes glassy, but I think you need to see it. The first document was a private medical evaluation of Regina from 1997, diagnosed with a rare behavioral disorder. Notes about compulsive deception, manipulative impulse control, and risk-seeking behavior. The therapist had flagged her as high risk. The file ended with a chilling note. Patient displays aptitude for trust abuse and disassociation of guilt. Recommended for long-term supervision or containment. The second document was an airline itinerary. Geneva to Boston. Under a name I didn't recognize. Dated just weeks before Regina married my father. And the same name appeared in an encrypted bank transfer 2 years later. She was working for someone, Elise said, or with someone. The final thread snapped into place. Regina wasn't the origin. She was the echo. The executioner. But someone else had written the playbook. I stood and walked outside. past the willow grove, to the back gate where we had recently planted apple trees. The moon was low. I whispered into the night, "I'm not afraid of you, whoever you are," because I had already lost everything once and survived. What do you threaten a woman who has already buried illusion? Nothing. Let me know when you're ready for part 13. The letter arrived without a stamp. Just a thin envelope slipped through the retreat's mail slot. Cream paper, handwritten in blue ink. You've stirred a nest you don't understand. Walk away before the fire burns you too. It wasn't signed. It wasn't folded. And it wasn't empty of meaning. Maya took possession of it the same day. Interpol logged it under their developing file, unknown entity, linked to Regina Morvan assets. The world was widening beneath my feet. And still, the women kept coming. Callie's Rest had become something of a haven for whisper networks. A woman arrived from Oslo with legal documents tucked into her coat sleeve. Another from Florence who hadn't spoken in court but wanted to share her evidence quietly. A third from Devon who just needed to cry. Each one brought something. Paperwork. Photographs. Scars. I learned how to carry what wasn't mine without mistaking it for my own. I learned to ask, "Do you want me to hold this or just hear it?" And most nights, I went to bed heavier than I woke. But not broken. Because I had something now I hadn't before. A purpose bigger than my grief. Then Elise called. "You need to come to Bristol. There's something you have to see." She had gone back to the storage unit, the one where we found the fake passports and old documents. This time she had unlocked a hidden panel in the back wall. Inside was a steel briefcase, fireproof. Inside that, a single item, a VHS tape. No label. She had it converted to digital by a private technician, and when she played it for me, I felt my skin go cold. It was surveillance footage. Of me. From over a decade ago. Me on the university campus, walking alone with my backpack. Me having coffee with a friend. Me at my mom's gravesite. The timestamps were scattered. The angles changed. Different seasons. Different years. "She was tracking you," Elise said, "from the very beginning." I sat back. "This wasn't about the cottage," I whispered. "This was always about control." That night, I didn't sleep. I walked the retreat grounds with a flashlight, checking locks, checking windows, checking every shadow twice. But there was no one. Only the wind. Only the knowledge that safety was an illusion even I had started to believe. The next day, I installed new cameras, alert systems, silent alarms. And I called Leo. I need to know how deep this surveillance went. He called me back 3 days later. "You might want to sit down." The video logs had metadata embedded in them. Encrypted. But once cracked, they pointed to an IP address. The address was registered to a company called Ashcroft Holdings, based in the Netherlands. "Ash," I whispered. Leo confirmed the connection. Project ASH wasn't a person. It was a holding company. A shell structure. Possibly the central node that managed Regina's activities and funded others. Interpol opened a case file within the hour. We traced outgoing funds to various locations: Morocco, Thailand, Malta, Canada. Shells on top of shells. But one name kept reappearing. A surname, Halden. Leo looked at me across the table. "Ever heard of it?" I nodded slowly. "It was the name of my father's first business partner." "Where is he now?" "He died. Car crash. Years ago." Leo leaned in. "Or someone wanted you to think he did." That night, I sat in my study and opened my father's old leather journal. Page after page of business notes, sketches, dreams. And one entry I had never noticed before. Asterisk Halden knows too much. If anything happens to me, check the Zurich ledger and the painting. She won't know it's hidden there. The painting. the seascape Regina sold. The one Dad had kept above the fireplace for years. It had been sold at auction to a collector in Vienna, and then it vanished. I called Maya. We need to find that painting, now, because whatever was behind the canvas, it might be the key to everything. The collector in Vienna didn't answer his phone, didn't answer his door, didn't respond to formal requests through Maya's firm or the Austrian Cultural Ministry. But I had come too far to be ignored. So I booked a flight. 2 days later, I stood in the marble atrium of an art restoration house tucked into a quiet street off the Danube, holding a photograph of the seascape painting and a forged confidence I hadn't worn in years. The receptionist blinked at the image, then murmured, "That came through here 6 months ago, belonged to Herr Adler. May I see it?" A pause. "He had it transferred to private storage, a vault north of the city, but he hasn't collected it yet." She hesitated. "Technically, I shouldn't give you the address." I leaned forward. "He bought stolen property. I can prove it. And what he owns may be evidence in a multi-nation fraud case." 5 minutes later, I had the address. The vault sat beneath a nondescript bank. Steel doors. I de-verified entry. I arrived with Maya and a local investigator who had coordinated with Interpol. The clerk opened the case slowly, white gloves trembling. There it was. The seascape. Dad's favorite. We brought it into a controlled lab. I kept my breath steady as they turned it over. And there, just beneath the back frame, etched in shallow grooves into the canvas stretcher, a code. "This isn't paint," the technician said. "It's micro-engraved. Laser-etched. You'd need UV to read all of it." We did. Under ultraviolet light, a pattern emerged. Lines, coordinates, numbers. A full archive location. And a phrase. Asterisk, trust the fire, not the mask. The coordinates pointed to a secure data facility in Norway. We cross-checked. It existed. Owned by a shell corp linked to Ashcroft Holdings. Leo coordinated with Norwegian investigators. Within 48 hours, the vault was accessed. Inside, a single external hard drive. Password protected. And in a secondary sealed envelope, written in my father's hand, Callista, for when the truth has teeth. Maya's tech team cracked the encryption using old family passphrases Dad had used before. My birthday, Mum's initials, the name of our old dog. It opened. What we found inside made everything prior feel like prelude. Bank transactions. Communications between Regina and a man named Ernst Halden. Dates. Payments. Targets. But most damning, a ledger of estate overrides. Dozens. Each marked with a code. And beside each code, a fee. Regina had been paid for every single extraction, every manipulated will, every coerced medical diagnosis, every falsified guardianship. And Halden? He was still alive, hiding in a private compound in the Canary Islands, under a new name, but the paper trail was undeniable. Interpol issued a warrant that night. The media exploded. Global Inheritance Syndicate exposed. UK woman leads multi-nation probe into fraud empire. My face was everywhere again. But this time, I wasn't running. I was writing. And speaking. And planning. Because now we had the full map. And the monsters at the end of the line. Regina had been the match. But Halden had been the oil. They arrested him 3 days later. Smuggled out by water taxi in the middle of the night. He smiled in the photos. Like he knew something no one else did. But that was the mistake they always made. Underestimating the women left in their wake. Callie's Rest doubled its campus. We opened a legal fund. We partnered with global aid coalitions. And I finally released the full digital archive Dad had left behind. Not just to investigators, but to the public. It trended worldwide within hours. Because truth, once it breathes air, refuses to be buried again. Fall settled over the retreat like a slow, golden sigh. The trees blushed copper. The breeze curled into the bones of the windows. Every night I walked the garden paths, lantern in hand, thinking of the long journey it had taken to arrive here. We were weeks past the arrest in the Canary Islands. Interpol had cracked open 3 other nodes tied to Halden, more arrests, more victims contacted. A full task force was now dedicated to tracking the inheritance exploitation ring. And through it all, I remained the face. Not because I wanted it, but because the world needed to see what surviving looked like when you told the truth out loud and didn't flinch. Callie's Rest was at full capacity. Some women came for a weekend, others stayed for months. Some wanted the press, others never gave their last name. We built a trauma-informed archive, a scholarship fund. We trained estate lawyers. And in one of our upstairs rooms, we created a hall of letters. Hundreds of notes from people across the globe who had found pieces of themselves in the story. Maya still handled press requests. Leo still quietly forwarded updates from the investigation. Elise, now a founding board member of our advocacy branch, ran workshops on economic coercion and digital evidence recovery. And me? I baked. I wrote. And I prepared for one final act. Because the Crown had asked me to testify once more. This time not as a victim, but as an expert. The Halden trial was beginning. He stood in a glass box at the center of a high-security courtroom, clean-shaven, blank-faced, the image of restraint. But beneath that stillness, I could feel the calculation. He spoke little. His attorneys tried to dismiss the emotional weight of the testimonies, called the women confused, overwhelmed, suggested they were capitalizing on grief. But that narrative didn't land anymore. The world had changed. By the time I took the stand, it was day 16. Ms. Morvan, the prosecutor asked, "Can you explain what happened to your mother?" I nodded. She died slowly, and no one questioned why, because she smiled, because she was elegant, because Regina, the woman who would later benefit from her death, made herself indispensable. And your father? He was targeted, manipulated, estranged from the people who loved him, lied to, drugged, robbed of agency and reputation. And yourself? I looked at Halden. He blinked. You built a system that punished trust. You weaponized loneliness. You turned grief into a transaction. But you made one fatal mistake. I leaned forward slightly. You trained Regina to erase people, and you thought I would stay erased. The room was silent. The judge asked for calm. But the moment was already marked. When the verdict came 2 weeks later, Halden was sentenced to 32 years, with no parole. International reparations followed. By then, I was already back at the retreat. On the first snowy morning of the year, a young woman arrived, wide-eyed, wordless, holding nothing but a folder. She stayed for 3 weeks before she spoke. When she did, it was to say, "I used to think no one would believe me, but then I read about you." She showed me the folder. More evidence. More names. And I understood once again that this was not an ending. This was a vigil. A watch. A long, quiet stand against the tide. Because stories like mine don't conclude. They echo. They ripple. They blaze. And if you listen carefully, you can hear them everywhere. In the click of a door locking for safety. In the rustle of a file being handed to someone brave. In the whisper of a name reclaimed from silence. And in the words I now keep etched into the gates of Callie's Rest. Truth is the fire they fear most. 2 more great stories are next. Don't miss them. Subscribe and turn on notifications.